Innovations in Alzheimer's therapies may show promise, but regulation, safety, access, and affordability are all really important factors in getting treatments into the hands of patients. Joining me now to discuss policy implications and the impact on patients are Rachel Sher, partner at Manatt Health and former Senior Policy Analyst at the FDA, and Nora Super, Executive Director of the Center for the Future of Aging at the Milken Institute. Thanks so much for joining me today. Let me just start out with Rachel, and really to both of you, and ask about the kind of regulatory infrastructure, the payment infrastructure, essentially the bureaucracy around care. And I know that bureaucracy is part about managing and managing public policy equities and trying to get things right. But it's also frustrating to a lot of the folks that are in it. Rachel, you know the FDA and the FDA's role, but can you share with us where the FDA and our concerns today about looking at Alzheimer's and the growth of its impact on our population is for you?
Yeah, I'm here, I think, to talk a little bit about sort of FDA's role in this whole system, and most relevant, what does FDA approval mean and how do drugs get approved? FDA is the main consumer watchdog that allows Americans to have access to the safest and most advanced pharmaceutical system in the world. Before a company can sell a drug, it needs to conduct studies to show that it is safe and effective for its intended use. The company then submits this evidence to FDA, who then conducts an independent and unbiased review to determine whether the drug's health benefits outweigh its known risks. And if it does, if the risks are outweighed by the benefits, then FDA can approve the drug to be marketed. But given the recent controversies and concerns that have been raised around the Alzheimer's treatments, et cetera, I think it's an important time to take a step back and remember, why do we even have an FDA? How did we get here? And if you'll bear with me for one moment, I want to just quickly walk through some of the history, because I think it's really important to remember where we are now and how we got here. So FDA was actually established in 1906 around the passage of the Pure Food and Drugs Act. And that law, while it was groundbreaking at the time, only prohibited interstate and foreign commerce in adulterated food and drugs. So for the first time, drugs had to be pure and of a certain quality to be marketed. But it quickly became clear that that wasn't enough to protect consumers. There were many instances of fraudulently marketed products that claimed to cure all kinds of ailments and diseases and led to injuries and deaths. And then in 1937, there was a particularly tragic disaster associated with a drug given to children that was actually made from an extremely toxic chemical closely related to antifreeze. And over 100 people died, including a lot of children. There were a lot of other examples of harm too, and FDA at the time actually compiled all these examples into what one reporter referred to as the American Chamber of Horrors. So it became clear that more needed to be done. And in 1938, Congress passed another law to require for the first time that drugs get pre-market approval from FDA before the drugs are marketed. But the only thing that was looked at then was whether the drug was safe. Once again, following the passage of that law, it became clear on the basis of a lot of tragedies and harm to consumers that more needed to be done again. And in 1962, there was another set of laws that were passed for the first time to require that drugs be shown to be effective too, so that they actually do what they say they will do. So now we have a standard that FDA has to look at to see whether the drug is safe and effective for the intended use. And FDA really plays an absolutely critical role in protecting us all from unsafe drugs and ensuring that we have access to effective ones.
Do you think, Rachel, just before I jump over to Nora, that when it comes to the point we are at right now, we've had an FDA provisionally approved drug in this drug called Aduhelm, and I know that you're not necessarily focused on Alzheimer's, but I think part of this story is there hasn't been a drug approval in this area for 19 years. So it's been sort of bleak. And so I think one of the questions we're going to be dealing with today among a lot of experts is are we at that moment where we were with cancer 20 years before cancer began to get real, efficaciousness, where we're at that innovation point where science and need and capacity is coming together? What does your gut tell you?
I mean, I think it's really important to make sure that we have a regulatory system that strikes the right balance between speedy approvals and careful approvals. The balance between safe and effective drugs has really got to be there. But I think it's important also to remember that the progress of science takes time. We're constantly learning more and more, but that just doesn't happen overnight. And again, as I was just mentioning, we really need the FDA to act as an independent auditor of the data and science underlying the drugs and medical devices that come out for approval. And I think the history shows how important that role is.
Right. Nora, as Rachel just said, science and public safety take time, but that clock is ticking for a lot of people. Dementia is a reality. It's part of our lives and families and communities. And you have been a very forceful critic of some of the neglect that's been baked in as we care for those who need our support and who are in dementia. Would you share with us your thoughts of where we need to improve our act?
Sure, happy to do so, and thank you for having me here today. In 2021, we launched the Milken Institute Alliance to Improve Dementia Care for exactly the reason that you stated. Not only are there a lack of treatments that we've known for years, but there's a lack of coordinated system based on how our federal programs pay for service and delivery in our country. And so millions of people living with dementia and their families and caregivers have struggled with the opportunity to try new treatments, as well as getting care delivered in a comprehensive, coordinated way. As Rachel mentioned, we do need to rely on science, and we need to go through the process. The FDA plays a very critical role. At the same time, with diseases like Alzheimer's disease and other related dementias, the prevalence has been growing dramatically. And as our population ages, we will continue to see more and more people diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease and related dementias over the next several decades, in fact, even doubling. And so those people who are living with are just desperate for some sort of solution, some sort of cure. We've been working on a cure for a very long time, but I did want to note your analogy to cancer. I think what we're seeing in the treatment area is a better understanding of brain disease and how it may be treated. And most experts are seeing that it will be treated more like cancer in the future, with multiple types of treatments available and an opportunity for more precision medicine. We have, there's unlikely to be one cure that patients take, but that's why it's important for us to have a multitude of therapies available for people. At the same time, I also was a federal employee at the White House Conference on Aging under President Obama, and the payment system is critical as well. If we come up with the best treatments in the world and no one can afford them, then that is not helpful as well. So CMS has an important role to play as they look at, what opportunities are available for their patients. Now, this decision, the FDA decision and the CMS decision are really controversial. A lot of people have been talking about the way the decisions have been made. And I don't want to weigh in on that. In our alliance, we have nearly 100 member organizations that have different points of view on this topic. But what they all agree upon is that we need to focus more on early detection and diagnosis and therapies that can work, because the people who are living with it today, they can't wait 3 or 5 years for people to come up with the right therapy. They're living with this disease right now. And anything we can do to make sure that they're getting coordinated, comprehensive care, the earlier people get diagnosed, the better, because most of these therapies that are in the system, including Aduhelm, are really targeted to people with mild cognitive impairment. And so a big focus we should have is making sure people get diagnosed early so they can take advantage of therapies that are in the pipeline and available today.
But before I jump back to Rachel, Nora, let me ask you, I've been reading some of your statements out there, and one very powerful, one of them that caught my eye was your critique that our traditional Medicare program is designed to reward volume over value. And with all the healthcare reform, I mean broadly outside of Alzheimer's, but what I thought Obamacare was supposed to be about was to move from fee-for-service to wellness, to try to look at the whole person, begin looking at everything from mental health and kind of create a more holistic approach to health and that ecosystem and what it means. But your critique is very specific and says this is not the case when it comes to treating those patients suffering from dementia. And I'll tell our audience, what I also learned in my research in this is America's most expensive disease. The costs of this are the biggest financial burden across classes of disease, as I understand it. So what are we getting wrong on that front, if you can give us a snapshot real quick of that?
Absolutely. Yes, I am not a fan of the fee-for-service system that we've had historically under the Medicare program, and it encourages people to order tests and procedures that may not be necessary, to prescribe medications that could be contraindicated with other medications. And so I really am a big advocate of coordinated care. Now, we have moved in that direction more since the Affordable Care Act was enacted, and even before that, with nearly 40% of Medicare beneficiaries now in Medicare Advantage plans.
Right.
And the administration, since the Obama administration, has been moving towards value-based care, and in fact made quite a statement earlier this year saying they want to have all of the systems paid by value-based care systems, so accountable care, many of the test pilots that have been out there. And we advocate at the Alliance that we really should have an alternative payment method for people living with dementia and their caregivers. As you mentioned, it's extremely expensive. It's also the 6th leading cause of death. And right now, the care that people receive is uncoordinated, fragmented, extremely costly, and not really, it does not look at what the patients and their families really want.
Right, thank you. And just real quickly, Rachel, I'd love to ask you, the other day I talked to Dr. Janet Woodcock, who is, I guess, has been the acting administrator of the FDA, now the principal deputy administrator now. And this is a conversation we were having about rare diseases, and she seemed really open to finding ways to build in patient voice, to build in rare disease advisors and into various parts of the FDA regulatory and oversight process. And her openness and the willingness to jump in was very impressive to me, actually. And I'm just wondering, given your insights into the FDA, and I say most of us don't understand. It's an opaque place that has a lot of power, but not a lot of people understand the mechanics. But just real, I know it's unfair, but in short form, what are the elements of FDA structural reform in this area, or structural enhancement, that might bring lived experience, that might bring in some of the issues and kind of knowledge reservoirs into a process, or do you think it is just fine as it is?
FDA has really shown some fantastic leadership in finding ways to really incorporate the patient voice into all phases of the drug development process, particularly in, obviously, the FDA review process. I think they've really come a long way in recognizing that the old way of doing things is not enough, that we've got to look at the symptoms and really hear out the patient's experience, lived experiences with these diseases, and help that get built into the drug development process. This has also been something that Congress has been very interested in over the years. The user fee reauthorization is coming up, and there's likely to be more discussions around ways to continue this trend. But I think FDA has really done a fantastic job to date of putting the patient front and center in everything it does.
Well, I really appreciate this conversation because it's not often when we have a focus, particularly in diseases, that we get to talk about the structural dimensions of the regulatory authorities, the payment authorities. I once talked to somebody in healthcare, and I asked him, "What's the biggest deal, that you could reform?" And he says, "Payments." And it just does not make the headlines of most papers or discussions. So I really want to thank both of you, Rachel Sher, partner at Manatt Health, former Senior Policy Analyst at the FDA, and she was former FDA counsel at the Energy and Commerce Committee, and Nora Super, who's Executive Director of the Center for the Future of Aging at Milken Institute. And I assume you have a really great website with resources on that, Nora, but I want to thank you so much for joining me for this discussion today.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you.